Hello and welcome. Today is Saturday, July the 5th, 2014. A belated 4th of July Independence Day to all my American listeners. This is Paul Sandhu coming to you with another episode of Wake Up and Live Radio. Today it is my pleasure to once again welcome the one and only golden jackass, Mr. Dr. Jim Willie. Jim Willie is the editor and publisher of the Hat Trick Letter, which can be found on his great website, goldenjackass.com. So without further ado, hello and welcome, Jim.
Oh, good to be back, Paul. It's been a little while, and so much is happening. I keep saying it, so much is happening. I think this is the year we get some significant changes, and people look back and say, wow, a lot happened in '08 and a lot happened in '14. But go ahead. It's just so, it's mesmerizing what's going on.
You're absolutely right, Jim. The first show we did, I believe, was back at the beginning of February, and I must say, in the intervening 4 or 5 months, so much has really indeed happened, and a lot of those things that are happening are things that you forecast in previous years and at the beginning in the first half of this year. So it's good to see that you are once again on track, and that your predictions are not falling by the wayside, but they're actually coming true. Now, Jim, if people, I think most people are aware, but some may not be, that you are actually a statistician by education, that you have a PhD in statistics. Now, I read, the statistics are generally made fun of, especially these days, because of all the garbage that comes out of the government. But statistical analysis actually can serve a very, very useful purpose. So, from your background and your knowledge, let's talk a little bit about statistics today, if you don't mind. Describe some real-life statistical projects from your industry career days.
Okay, well, let me start with a preface that one of my least favorite sayings that I hear out there is, there are lies, damn lies, in statistics. And another one that I really hate is that, oh, you can say anything you want if you just twist the statistics. You can prove anything.
If you torture the numbers enough, you can make them to say anything you want.
Yeah, so you torture the numbers. I like that. I've heard that too. And then there was Dizzy Dean, a pitcher from way back, like 70, 80 years ago. And he was an announcer with horrible grammar in St. Louis, professional Major League Baseball pitcher turned announcer. And he used to say, I never did like them statics. But, there are a lot of very high-powered statistical projects and methods being used. I should say methods being used in projects. To me, it's a tool, a set of tools in a big tool bag. I mean, if you want to move a big rock, what do? You get a big crowbar in there and you multiply your power and force. Well, if you want to learn what's going on in a population, you do a sample, which is kind of a leveraged device. But making conclusions off the sample is where the inference comes in, and you have to decide that if one sample has this average and another sample has that average, and they're not the same, or are they statistically different? Well, those are some of the simple problems, but I'd like to mention a few of the more intriguing and big payoff projects that I've been involved with in my career. And, it's hard to call it a career, but, it is a career. When you're in the career, you don't call it a career. You're just doing your work. You show up at work the next day and you try to enjoy it. And I can honestly say that for well over 95% of the days that I went to work, I bounced out of bed and did my breakfast and went off to work with a smile on my face. I enjoyed what I was doing. It was a lot of fun, but I worked at a company called Digital Equipment Corporation straight out of graduate school. That's DEC. We used to call our company DEC. It was IBM, and number 2 was DEC, and number 3 was HP. Interesting that all three had acronym names. But DEC, and we were called Deckies. And at our peak, we were way over 120,000 employees, and about 90,000 of those employees were in the United States. It had a bad outcome. Ironically, after a book in Search of Excellence was written about how wonderful digital had been run and designed, and its products, like the old PDP-10 and the VAX, and its world-famous operating system, VAX VMS, virtual memory system. But at DEC, I had a job in a quality control reliability consulting group, and I was asked to go in and help one big manufacturing plant in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But here's the nutshell of what it was. They were doing dumb accelerating testing. They would take 100 units off the line. Think of it as, say, a memory unit or a disk drive, or some other small component, mid-sized component to a computer system. They were just testing it for 100 hours, and okay, let's move on. Well, they wanted a feedback mechanism, so I helped them design a hazard fitting model that had an exponential decay. Anyway, I don't want to get into all the details of the model itself, but what it involved was a feedback loop that would say 100 hours is not a good idea. You're really not getting any more payback after hour number 61, 2, and 3. So we would say, well, 62 hours with a 95% confidence interval of say 61 to 63, that's where you need to cut it off, because you're not really learning anymore after that. Well, we did that, and Albuquerque saved $3 million a year. It took about 5 months to develop, made it into an engineering specification, and then adopted it at 6 or 8 other U.S.-based manufacturing plants, adopted it in the Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore plants, then had it adopted in the 2 Ireland plants, the 1 Scotland plant, the 1 Kaufbeuren in Germany. The Irish plants were Clonmel and Galway, and in Scotland it was Ayr, A-Y-R. So, multiply the 3 million by 28 plants, and you get about $80 million of savings per year.
So you must have gotten a big bonus that year.
No, I got an invitation to leave my group because it was horrendously managed. I told the boss to go F himself because what I wanted was something that they didn't know how to do in the lower management ranks. I said, well, why don't you just give me a raise, give me a bonus, give me 2 people to work under me, 1 a programmer, and we'll go off and do other things like this. And they said, no, Jim, we really don't think you have it in you. This might have been a one-hit wonder. I mean, they were just really badly run at digital in the middle ranks. They had some excellent vice presidents, like the fellow who went on and started a small outfit called Cisco Systems. All right, that was a cast-off of digital. There were lots of there was another guy named Charlie Rose, a really brilliant guy who wanted digital to start a small personal computer division. And the owner of the company, the founder, Ken Olsen, said, no, personal computers, no, we're not going to get involved with games. We do real business. So he went off and started a small company called Compaq.
Oh, wow, okay.
Okay, there are about 18 stories like that, but you get the idea.
I do.
So I went on and moved on to a different job at the same Digital Equipment Corporation. So I spent 5 years at the Quality Control Consulting group, and I went on to a marketing research group that was, how do they call it? Internally funded, zero profit center that has totally dedicated to digital products. So the most interesting thing I did there, it was a fascinating job, those 7 years in the second job at Digital. Fascinating, because I got to learn a little bit more about some of the multivariate, the more high-powered, interesting, intriguing methods that I wasn't really great at when I left graduate school. I focused on, 4 or 5 areas, and I left alone 2 or 3, and it's very hard. But we did something called an orthogonal fractional factorial model. And, just a quick description of what that might be. Suppose you want to go out and sample, 10,000 people with a questionnaire, a written questionnaire. They just check off a bunch of things and send it in. But you might want to vary the operating system type. And back then, Unix was just starting up. So it'd be Unix versus a proprietary like the old digital famous VMS, VAX VMS. You might want to vary the memory size. You might want to vary the processor speed and vary loaded applications, vary the disk drive capacity, and have people value it on a 1 to 10 scale. Yes, I think 9, this is really good, valuable. Oh, no, I don't like that. Call that a 4. Just keep, so you can vary a whole bunch of different characteristics. And if you multiply all the possible factorial possibilities, you might come up with 87,000. But we don't have that many opportunities out there for sampling so many people with so many versions and getting repeat responses per each version of the questionnaire. So we would come out with 8 questionnaires and use a fractional factorial design that allowed independence of the measurements and the value of each of those components, each of those characteristics that I described. It is a fascinating method, and it was developed largely by the Japanese. We used to use the Taguchi manuals, and I still have it. I couldn't throw it away. All right, then I moved on and went to Staples after digital died. And ironically, they got bought by Compaq.
Which was bought by HP later, yeah, okay.
Right. So my piddling pension from 12 years working at Digital is now owned and managed by Hewlett-Packard, and they're not doing very well. So, I expect that that'll be as profitable as Social Security. I went on to Staples, and I did a number of things there in the almost 5 years. The biggest thing I ever did was an inventory replenishment forecasting model. They wanted to forecast, all right, in this store, what are we going to sell for PCs? What are we going to sell for paper? How about pens and stuff? How about lamps and stuff? How about, big binders and things? Just lots and lots of categories in Staples. So what I did was I took the massive store model, and which you could consider to be the columns, and I just put in rows for it for the various product types. And I used something called the Kroithoff iteration method that managed to come up with a complete forecast system for all the products that was totally consistent and added up properly on the columns for the stores. So that turned out to be the inventory planning model. And they tried to alter it many, many times, but they always went back to my calculated method. That didn't have any huge payoff where I could say what it was worth, but I did do one project. It was a sidebar thing with a friend named Ron Garassi. He was a smart guy with an MBA and took some statistics, and he convinced his managers that, we should do an elasticity study and call on that Jim guy over in the forecasting office, because I know his boss, and he said that Jim would be willing to help us out. I was. So what we did there was we varied 3 types of boxed paper. Now, this is not sexy stuff. And I used to joke when I first arrived at Staples, which was started by a Harvard MBA, Richard Stemberg, and it was loaded. About half the vice presidents were Harvard MBA types. They were smart cookies, really smart, sharp people who made great decisions. But box paper was not sexy, and it was a $450 million product. Okay, that's a lot of money, so we wanted to improve the profit margin on it. So we took a look at 3 different types of box paper, draft quality. You know, you want to print out a manuscript, it's 60 pages, you're going to mark it up. You don't need high quality, so you use draft quality because you're going to print it out again later. Then you got regular paper we're all familiar with. Then you got color quality, which is what you print. You don't want it to run. You want to print a color, either a bubble or a laser or whatever. You want it to be high quality and maybe slightly glossy. So we did an elasticity model using about 40 stores, and about 20 of them turned out to be control groups. And we had 3 types of stores. A town that might have just a staple store, nothing else. Another town might have a staple and a competitor like Office Max or Office Depot. And then the third type would be a store with the staples, but it had both a staples competitor and another competitor. We called the other staple a cannibal store. It had a cannibal store and a competitor, so both types mixed. So we went off and we varied prices. You know, here's the lesson here. If you've got competition, you might lower the price a smidgen and realize a big jump in sales because your competitive advantage on the pricing side. And, you know, the other side is, well, there's no competition at all. Let's nudge up the price a little bit, but not too much. And let's see how much we lose. Okay, so those are elasticity issues. Incredibly, we raised the profit margin from 19 to 26% in 3 months. That's $32 million in additional profit. And you know, you'd think again, gee, you must have gotten a nice little gold star on your forehead or a raise or something. No, I got nothing. I got nothing except disdain from a vice president who was not a Harvard MBA.
Oh, I thought I saw your picture at the Staples, so that wasn't you then, eh?
No. No. Well, okay, let me just finish off the statistics path here. Here's a clever method that people can identify with. The name of it is called logistic regression. And no need to get into the formality of the model, but suppose you want to examine the likelihood of some product like Magic Jack, response for purchase of Magic Jack, or say various types of portable PCs, like, you know, the pads, or types of cell phones, or type of car stereo component, or even something as strange as chewing tobacco. Well, you've got lots of data, say from you know, 89,000 records, and the fields include age, education, gender, race, location like rural, suburb, or city, work area, company size. So what you do is you create a model. Let's just focus on Magic Jack. All right, Magic Jack, you know, might have a greater tendency for younger people, might have more of a tendency for educated, might have more of a tendency for male. Not that women are, you know, less. Just let's just go with the argument here. It might not be popular in the rural areas. So you've got 89,000 records, and you build this logistic regression model that tells you all these different characteristics and how they contribute toward likelihood of wanting a Magic Jack. And now you've decided, well, we're going to do some, you know, a marketing campaign, and we're going to spend, you know, $8,000, and we're going to go out and mailing to people, or some other device like maybe phoning people, telling them of an offer. But we don't want to do it cold, and we've got these 10,000 possible people that are not in the existing database. There are 10,000 other people that we don't really know anything about regarding their product tendencies, but we do know their age, education, gender, race, location, work area, and company size. So you work the model on the extra new 10,000 sample, and then you say, all right, well, we only have enough money for 1,000. Let's go get the best 1,000. So you do the top 10 percentile after deploying your logistic regression model. You only go after the 0.9 and above on the percentiles. So I didn't say that properly. you've got an estimation of their likelihood for the Magic Jack, but you're just going to get the highest 10% for those estimated percentages, and the percentage is likelihood of wanting Magic Jack. So, you can vastly improve your hit rate, as we called it, from the cold calling. Now, you'd think, in summary, you'd think that the United States would have a huge advantage because we've got so many professors and so many PhD statisticians running around in the last 30 years. The United States would have taken the world lead in all this. No, they didn't. No, the United States is one of the laggards. I think because we don't have very good middle-level management in corporate America. There's a fellow named Richard Deming, and he's considered the god of quality control, the most famous man ever to hit the streets and the laboratories and the plants for quality control. He was rejected in the United States from various companies, so he went to Japan and is responsible for Japan in the 1980s for becoming a powerhouse in reliability and quality in manufacturing. He was revered and worshipped in Japan, and he came back to the United States, and they gave him credit for his life work, but not as it was applied to American industry. It was applied to Japanese industry. So that's a nice little rundown. I've never done that before in a group, but I thought that would be quite interesting to run through there, Dash. I hope that made some sense.
Well, it did make sense, Jim. So in light of all these statistics that are issued by the government, by the BLS, for example. So what you're saying is that if they were doing some honest number crunching, their forecasting and their analysis would be much more valuable to not just the average person, but to corporations, to businesses, to governments, to state governments, etc., that they could do better forecasting, and it could in turn result in savings of billions and possibly trillions of dollars. But they don't do that, do they?
No, I'd take that argument one step further. I think you could use statistical analysis in the economics departments in Wall Street and demonstrate that QE bond monetization is having a very detrimental effect, and that zero interest rate is having a very detrimental effect. The QE having a huge effect downside on the economic growth GDP, and the zero interest rate having a huge downside effect on money velocity. What we're seeing is a rampant growth in money produced, generated, falsely, made, I don't know the right word, counterfeited. While money is growing out of sight in volume, the velocity is going down. They could use statistics to prove that this is not working, and the way to go would be the gold standard. That's what I think the conclusion would be from a lot of viable, well-done, expert statistical projects. But instead, we've taken a lot of statistics methods and we've turned it on its ear. How can we falsify the CPI with statistics? Oh, let's do some substitution of let's put pork in this month instead of chicken. My joke is they could put in some Alpo dog food instead of beef. They could put in sawdust instead of sugar. I mean, they distort the jobs market statistics, the economics growth GDP, and the price inflation with CPI. Those are the three main ones that they distort. And what I try to do in the hat trick letter is explain a lot of different devices that are false and why they're false and what they're getting out of them and what the real number is. When I need the real numbers, I turn to John Williams and shadow government statistics. We've got 23 to 4% unemployment right now, and we've got 5 or 6% price inflation, but I think it's starting to accelerate in a big way, especially for food with all the different drought problems. And now we're starting to see China lock out some agricultural output. I heard a story a while back where on the western part of the United States, I can't remember the exact state, the Chinese bought a huge farm and they're exporting alfalfa for hay and other feed for livestock, and they're exporting the entire 100% of the output from the farm to China for their livestock. So that's going to start happening more and more, and that'll contribute to the U.S.-based shortages because our nation is going to be foreclosed upon on the debt default.
Well, before we move on to the next topic, the things that you are bringing on, are mentioning here are truly, well, they are gargantuan, especially this problem with the food supply and all that. So I would nominate you to be the head statistician of the United States government. So I'll send in a note to Obama to make sure that you get appointed, Jim.
Well, if that went any distance, Wall Street would have me shot.
Okay, well, for your own safety, we'll leave you where you are. Okay, let's change subject here. I hear a lot of my listeners and people in general, they always have this question that you guys have been talking about this collapse for a long time, and where is this collapse? Where is this collapse? So you have always claimed that the Lehman failure marked U.S. systemic failure. So people that wonder when the system breakdown will occur, your conclusion is that it already has. So Jim, can you please identify the big events on breakdown that are right in front of our eyes?
Well, sure. They're all the big events that we consider to be parts of the solution when actually they're evidence of the breakdown getting worse. You can make an analogy of a guy goes into intensive care and, he's only kept alive by respirator, electrical shock, and, an IV feed. Try to take away any of those three and he'll collapse and be dead in about 90 minutes with, fibrillations and breathing difficulties and passing out, low blood pressure, and he just dies. That's Uncle Sam. You could look back. I often get the question from people who are very aware of the breakdown. They say, when did it really start? You can always go back and say, well, it was the creation of the Federal Reserve. That's fine. But, the Federal Reserve did a pretty good job until 1971. They really, they might have had some behind the scenes skullduggery and thefts and whatever. But we maintained a gold standard till 1971. I don't want to get into all the ins and outs of the Great Depression, and there was a role for that in the Federal Reserve. There was a role for that in the stock market and abuse of leverage and debt and margin, and that's where a lot of guys like Joseph Kennedy Sr. made some money after his bootlegging. So we consider the Kennedy family the Camelot, but what they were involved in for wealth creation was a tremendous amount of bootlegging during Prohibition. Underground alcohol. Transport and sale, and then followed by shorting the stock market during the Depression. This is where the American icons come from. That's not credit worthy. And then you've got clowns like Gates who come up with a huge monopoly. He just purchased an operating system and developed it for a PC, and now he's taking his billions and developing viruses that kill Africans. I mean, it's amazing what's going on with the wealthy Americans. But I look at 1971. That's when we got off the gold standard. They call it breaking the Bretton Woods Accord. Bretton Woods is just a cool little resort town in New Hampshire. I mean, I've been through it. The White Mountains. It's a spectacular area. It's a small state, but it's loaded with stuff. Of course, it's got its biker gangs down south in Orchard Beach, and we try to avoid that area when we're going to the various beaches and restaurants because they're a tough gang. But 1971 is when we got off the gold standard, and I was young then. I was a junior in college, and I was taking economics courses, and I really didn't attach any significance to it. I just thought, well, it looks like the United States is not going to give up its gold. Okay. But I didn't think, well, fast forward 20 years and you have severe problems. I didn't think that way. But that's what happened. We set a clock in 71, and it should have tipped off a lot of people because, you know, in the mid 80s, we heard, when I was at Digital again, we heard that Intel was closing its California fab labs, as we called them, chip fab labs. And they were going to start making their chips in the Far East. They're going to make it in the Pacific Rim. And we thought, this is not good. We're moving our manufacturing, and then we used to hear, oh yeah, but all the IP, the intellectual property, and the patents will be held by the United States, and all the distribution and the sales and the benefits of the computer will come to the United States. And I thought, well, that's part of the benefit, but there's still manufacturing income, the workers, and this is a bad trend. All right, fast forward to 1987 for another big event. It was Black Monday. Now, many people just don't attach much significance to it. They think, well, we got past that. Not very well. What followed 87 was the creation of all the floating derivatives for the banks. Because many of the banks were insolvent. The banking system, without the ability to print money, was baseless. So we created these phony bank derivatives. I don't want to get into all the different types, but there's several. I mean, there are exotics and directs and Forex linkage, gold linkage, currencies, and interest rate, and LIBOR. Everything's tied together. They created a floating derivative platform during the 1990 decade. And it's not good. Then another big time point was the irrational exuberance speech by Greenspan, the central banker for the U.S. Fed, in 1996. Well, he was trying to warn people that something that he did has resulted in a giant bubble and problem toward asset bubbles. Well, what did he do? Well, 2 years before 96, 2 years before his irrational exuberance speech, he changed the policy under prodding by Robert Rubin, the Treasury Secretary. And Rubin and Clinton did a lot of nasty things when it came to finance, but what they did in this case was they had the stat labs, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, change the consumer price inflation methods. They had the jobless rate reported as those who received state unemployment. So it wasn't jobless, it was just what's the percentage of people who are jobless in the system. But what Greenspan did was he changed in about 1994, he changed the method, and the policy became, without great announcement and fanfare, he changed the way, the manner, and the rate that they grew the money supply. They allowed the money supply to grow so long as the CPI didn't rise. So money supply could grow, provided we didn't see price inflation. But then we didn't see it all that well because it was delayed. It was also shipped to Asia. That's why they had the 1995 Asian meltdown, starting in Thailand, moving to Japan and Korea. All right, we caused the Asian meltdown from Greenspan's change in money supply growth until we saw CPI growth and price inflation. But we doctored the CPI. So we let the money supply grow way out of proportion with economic growth. If you've got 3%, 4%, 5% economic growth, you let your money supply grow by 3, 4, or 5%. Instead, we were growing by 8, 10, 12%, having very little growth at all. All right, that was a huge event in the breakdown. The tech telecom bust in 2000 was an obvious signal. And again, we think, oh gosh, we got through that. No, we didn't. Because immediately after that, Greenspan started in 2001, he brought down the interest rate. And you remember how he used to jawbone? He used to get out and talk in the markets and say, use this lower interest rate on mortgages to refinance your loans and even to get home equity lines of credit to support the economy. He actively encouraged the abuse of credit to make a second straight housing bubble without a correction. So we end up getting a double correction in 2007, 8, and 9. Oh gosh. So the subprime bust happened in 2007. And we think, well, we got through that. Well, no, we didn't. We had the Fannie Mae implosion and its nationalization, AIG nationalized. And what was the third one? Oh, well, Lehman died. So we had the two nationalizations, but Fannie Mae had another story behind it for its nationalization. They wanted to keep the multi-trillion, with a T as in Thomas, multi-trillion dollar fraud under the US government roof, where most of the culprits had resided when they did their thefts, like President Clinton and President Bush, who stole $1.6 trillion out of the Fannie Mae HUD, Housing Urban Development Funds. All right, so if you nationalize that, you can keep it all in-house and make sure that the Department of Treasury keeps a lid on that. All right, the Lehman Brothers kill was actually a Goldman Sachs bailout. They decided, let's kill one of our banks, one of our own. So they killed the one with the biggest mortgage exposure. And several months before Lehman, they killed Bear Stearns. It's not really remembered much, but Bear Stearns had a significance. They were heavily long on gold and heavily short on the dollar and made enemies in Wall Street as a result, so they got killed. Now, then in 2009, there was another significant event for the breakdown. That was the Financial Accounting Standards Board changed the accounting rules so all the big banks could set their own portfolio values, especially for the derivatives and the exotic contracts. They were told, okay, you can keep them at book value, but they had gone down to value at 70% loss, and some were totally worthless. That way you could have the big Wall Street banks and other major US banks continue operations as zombies. That's one reason you don't get a recovery right now. We're not getting it for the last 6 years. Why? Because the banks are not credit engines anymore. They're insolvent, and they cover up their insolvency with the April 1st, 2009 FASB congressional legislation. It's amazing. Then you get to the major breakdown events, like in 2009, moving towards 0%. You had the European Central Bank claim they would never follow the United States. I got into a bit of a tussle with one of my German sources. He told me, no, the Euro Central Bank will never follow the United States. I said, give them a year and wait to see the euro rise to 160 and the Germans lose a good portion of their export trade. And yes, the Euro Central Bank will. And that's exactly what happened. And I had to be careful because I was dealing with an 80-something-year-old ex-CEO of a giant German corporation. And I'm just a lowly 55-year-old jackass. So score one on that. Then in 2011, another huge breakdown was quantitative easing, the unsterilized bond monetization. A lot of people wonder, well, what do you mean by sterilized or unsterilized? I mean, they're buying bonds. Isn't that good? Isn't that stimulus? Well, it's not, because it's adding money to the system without removing it elsewhere. If you remove it, it's called sterilized. But if it's not removed, it's unsterilized. It's just raw hyper monetary inflation that when I was in economics classrooms in the 70s, I was told that's very destructive. And when I investigated further, I learned, well, it destroys capital. And how it's destroying capital now is really simple. The response for adding to the money supply out of control is that we're increasing the cost structure. Price of food, price of fuel, price of metals, price of scrap, price of everything. But the price structure for selling things is not going up. So you're getting a squeeze on profits. You shut down businesses, you turn off machinery. That is retired capital, AKA killed capital. So capital destruction is a consequence of QE. Now, the most recent signs of breakdown are usage of war to defend the dollar, like in Libya, Egypt, Syria, Cyprus, and Ukraine. The most recent evidence of breakdown in my book is not so much Ukraine, because that's real. They're trying to prevent Russia from establishing a monopoly on European energy supply. But the divorce between the United States and the Saudis, it's becoming loud, clear, and obvious. We have, it seems like, one conference per month now between the Saudi, not so much heads of state, they're heads of ministries and corporations and banks, with the Chinese. So we're starting to see now evidence that the petrodollar is going away, and the Chinese are going to demand soon that they pay for Saudi oil in yuan. And I think very soon the Saudis are going to say, you want to pay in anything else? That's fine. You want to pay in euros, pounds, yen, or even Swiss francs? Fine. Come one, come all. But, let's make it just a major currency. We don't want Colombian pesos. So many are the breakdown events. They're all in front of our eyes. And the biggest evidence that I see in the statistics is the money supply growing like 300% in 6 years, and the money velocity dropping by over 50%. We're starting to see now in the economy a major breakdown. Q1 saw a revised annualized 2.9%, which just means they take their quarter versus quarter decline and multiply it by 4 to make it an annualized versus quarterly. So minus 3%, call it. Well, is that really the recession rate of the U.S. economy? Oh, no, it's much worse than that, because the typical U.S. economics deceptive statisticians, who I can call on very quickly for their deceptions, they're calling our inflation growth. They say we only have 2.5%, 3%. Let's just say it's 2.5% for inflation. But really, it's more like 5.5%. So they have a 3% lie there. So add on another 3%. The U.S. economy is running at a 6% recession rate, whereas before they were only maybe about 4%. I've been saying now for 4 straight years, we got a 4 or 5% recession rate. So our economy has declined 20% since Lehman. And the Chinese
Did you say it's declined 20%, Jim? That's shocking.
Well, if you properly account for inflation. Now, they would say, oh, no, look at the numbers. No, they're pointing to the nominal numbers. Nominal means let inflation be integrated in with your numbers that you're reporting. I'm saying you take the annual 7 and 8% inflation that we saw in 08, 09, and 10, and now it's come down a little bit to maybe 7 or 6% as reported by shadow government. But it's going to rise back up again because we're seeing tremendous inflation in insurance, fuel, and food. So I think we're going to see once again an 8% CPI with the shadow government statistics folks for later this year. If you take that and reduce your nominal gross domestic product figures by the actual price inflation, I mean, let me just keep something really simple. Suppose you've got an economy that's running at 10 trillion, and in 1 year you're up a full trillion. You're up 10%. Well, gee, on a nominal basis. But then you measure your price inflation, and it's exactly 10%. Well, then all your growth is that 10%. So you dock your 10% nominal by the 10% inflation, and you get 0% growth. If you take your nominal growth and subtract the actual true inflation, you get the actual true recession rate. And I'm saying it's around 6% or worse right now per year.
But then, Jim, that seems to me that that can only continue for not very long, a year or 2 or 3 at that rate, and then you really will see the evidence of the U.S. slipping into a second world status, or even down to third. How long can this kind of recession continue? It can't go on very long.
No, but I think that's why we had QE. In 08, 09, and 10 and 11, we did not get the recovery. We continued to see the 4 and 5% recession, and we hit a critical mark of breakdown where we could not finance our own debt. There was your breakdown, Dash. Your breakdown was made evident by QE. We could not finance our own debt. We couldn't encourage foreigners to pony up their emerging market surpluses. They don't want it anymore. And now the U.S., the Federal Reserve, is purchasing over 80% of the U.S. government debt. That is your breakdown. We're not getting through this. We're breaking down from this.
And it seems to be breaking down faster, because I've been reading now almost on a daily basis about like the BRICS alliance that's formed against the dollar. China and Korea announced yesterday that they're going to start trading in their own currencies. So this is accelerating, and it just seems to be like an avalanche coming down the mountain.
It does. I'm glad you pointed that out, the acceleration, because I've got an analogy. If you drop a bowling ball from the 30th story of a building on the roof, you just drop it. I mean, don't worry about friction on it. It accelerates. A bowling ball will not, float off like a feather in the winds. It'll drop and it'll accelerate. Well, I believe that QE is forcing an acceleration of capital destruction, and here's how. I'm amazed when I hear economists come out with an argument for something and they ignore the feedback loops. Feedback loops are very important in forecasting, because you can make a claim on something for moving, say, 1 or 2%. But if you keep it in place, you start getting a feedback loop where the system reacts to its own change. And here's how I believe QE is having an acceleration in capital destruction. You start seeing some companies close from the vanished profit margin. The costs are rising. The pricing power is really not there. You can't raise prices, so you start closing certain unprofitable stores. You start closing unprofitable fabrication plants because the cost of materials is going up. Then you lay off the workers. Here's your feedback loop. The workers don't have as much money to spend in the economy. They start relying on government dole, the welfare, the jobless insurance, but they're not able to spend like they used to. And they're no longer, from the feedback loop, from the housing crush, they're no longer able to pull money out of their homes for home equity, and they're not able to spend that. I call it burning your furniture. So the feedback loop involves fewer people in the next round participating in the economy, and before you know it, a few more stores close down in the mall. And some of them were, pretty strong little stores. And then when I heard a few months ago that Staples, my ex-employer, I worked there from 96 to 2000. My Staples employer, when I was there, it grew from 280 stores to 1,100. They went up higher and higher, but they just announced a closing of over 200 stores. Staples is one of the best run of all the retail chains, and Walmart is very well run. It may have a lot of extraordinarily strange clients running through their stores with their backsides hanging out or whatever, their G-strings showing, but Staples and Walmart are extremely well run with very good information technology and inventory replenishment management. So we're getting the feedback loop now working in overdrive. We're getting an acceleration of the job layoffs. They can't blame a bad winter on a full year of statistics and declines in the economy. Now, I think this free fall is really picking up speed in ways that's starting to frighten the public, because they see that once vibrant mall is one half empty, and there's trash all over the place. And they're boarded up, and some of the windows are broken by vandals who come on by and for sport throw some rocks. So the feedback loops are at work in a huge way. Much less income for workers who are being laid off. They're not replenishing the machinery. They're retiring it. And you're starting to see some benefits of the liquidations and lower prices here and there. Take advantage of the liquidations. because, you know, when the liquidations are done, you're going to see skyrocketing prices. But I'm not really sure the liquidation is going to ever be done until the U.S. gets on the gold standard. And I think the United States is going to be the last nation in the stinking world to go back to the gold standard. They might claim to come out with a new republic dollar in the coming months. They might claim that it's gold backed. But if you look closely, you'll see the same accounting shenanigans and fraud where they use deep storage gold that the Treasury Department fully lists on their ledgers. We're talking about nothing more than Nevada unmined ore. It's not gold.
Right. Okay, what you're suggesting here then is that with all these things that are actually going on, seems like I'm getting visions of the whole U.S. of A turning into a big giant ghost town, and I hope really that it doesn't quite come to that. Now, one of the offshoots of this is that I have read recently that some major economists like Paul Krugman and people that write for major papers, let's put it that way, they are now suggesting that wars are good for the economy. So do you think there is something being planned? Like, I know we're getting off topic here a little bit, but, like maybe that's one card they have up their sleeve, that they want to launch some real major war here.
Well, I made a joke when I started the Hat Trick Letter, and I've mentioned this in several other interviews, that when you don't have a backing for the dollar, you must search for something that is actually there at work. And for the United States, it's the Treasury bond debt. So we've got a debt-backed currency, and that's why you're seeing a deterioration in the economy, because assets are suffering from the currency. I call it a contaminated money supply, contaminated money blood through the system. If you have contaminated blood, you put at risk every single one of your organs. If you have a contaminated currency, you put at risk every single one of your industry sectors. And that's what's going on right now. I made the joke that if it wasn't for debt backing the dollar, it's the military. And I pointed to some stories. In 2003, Saddam Hussein was attacked in Iraq because a couple of years before then, he started selling oil in euros. And he used to be boastful about it. Like, just making claims that he's avoiding the United States and he got away with it. And now we got some benefits because the euro is rising. Well, it rose until he got attacked, until the U.S. came in there and stole their central bank. Remember the story about the U.S. military encountered a cave full of yellow painted bricks?
Yes.
That was a false story to try to send you in a diversion, because they stole the Iraqi central bank. And it was a lot bigger than the 33 tons that they stole in the Ukraine central bank in March. So this is what we do now. We have war and we steal central banks. In 2005, South Korea announced that they wanted to diversify their Forex reserves, their national reserves, wanted to diversify away from the treasury bonds. In 2 weeks, they had U.S. military naval exercises off their coast. So they announced that they were going to stop the diversification. In 2008 or so, Iran was trading very heavily their energy sales and taking in non-dollars. They were taking in lots of different currencies, and they were even taking in some gold. I think it was kind of embryonic at that time, coming from India through Turkey. But what happened to Iran? They declared a rogue state, and suddenly they have nuclear aggression plans. Well, gosh, I get tired of this boogeyman painting that the United States government puts on any nation that wants to move away from an illegitimate, corrupted dollar that serves as a contamination in the blood system for the entire global economy, not just the United States. There's a common link between Cyprus, Syria, and Ukraine, and the thread is Gazprom. Gazprom Bank was huge in Cyprus, and although it's not a war event, it certainly felt like a financial war at the time. But Gazprom Bank was the biggest Russian bank in Cyprus. You don't think of Gazprom as being a bank, but yeah, they got a bank as a subsidiary. And Russians were using it to convert treasury bonds into gold. So, can you remember that Cyprus had its events to block things and kind of put at a standstill their whole banking system? And talk about confiscations of accounts and haircuts of 30%? Wow.
Yes, I do recall.
Well, then Syria. What's the Gazprom element in the Syrian war? Well, that's where the Iran pipelines were supposed to traverse across northeast Iraq and into Syria and hit the ports where Gazprom was going to take it and supply Europe. Well, the United States got in the way of that. Then you have Ukraine, which I believe is very obviously an attack against Gazprom because the pipelines are in the news as much as some of the slaughters. But again, the United States, with its black op mercenaries, stole the central bank gold in the dead of night and gave some threatening orders to the airport traffic controllers to get out of the way. This is none of your business. And if they had pursued, they would have gotten machine gun fire at their air controller tower. But 33 tons of gold was stolen, and $70 billion of Kiev banking system funds and oligarch money, the entire family fortune of the former president of Ukraine, was stolen, and it's sitting in Switzerland. So war is profitable for stealing gold and stealing from banks. This is where we've come now, Dash. Unfortunately, the defense of the dollar is now at its last stage. You want to oppose the dollar? You want an alternative to the dollar in trade? We're going to declare war on you.
So, Jim, it seems like to me that all the low-hanging...
That's where we are now.
The low-hanging fruit like Iraq and Syria and Libya and all these, Ukraine, they've already been picked off. So now, is there any danger that they can go after like the bigger fish?
Don't know what happened.
Okay, anyhow, that sounds better. So, okay, yeah, that was my, and I just wonder about that. I don't think it's going to happen, but you keep hearing like Russia was such a big friend and a good guy after Glasnost and all that, and now suddenly they're the big bad wolf again. So I just wonder if they would, the people, these neocons would be insane enough to launch something against Russia or maybe some other major nation. Due to some technical difficulties, this interview had to be cut short, but it will be continued. It has actually been continued, and we have a recording of a second hour which is being edited and will be posted on Thursday, July the 10th. So be sure to check back on that day as Jim Willie continues his discussion with the evidence of the state of the recession of the U.S. economy in particular and what lies upon the horizon for the rest of 2014 and into the rest of this decade. Thank you for listening. This is Paul Sandhu.